Hello and welcome back to the worst War Machine channel on the internet. I'm Dorian and it's time for another War Machine Weekly. Now, this one here is a topic that locally we've been talking about a lot. I threw it on the suggestions for the patrons because, you know, I wanted to see if they're interested in it too. And yeah, that's the one that went out this time. This is the one they voted on. And so this is going to be a mini series that I'm going to be calling Jank or Shank. We're going to be taking something that's like this crazy janky idea and trying to decide whether it is legitimate jank that is maybe viable on the table, or is it garbage and we should shank it and just forget it, throw it in the trash, like ridiculous. Now, what this jank is all about is really taking Caine3 and just spamming Tesselators. So really, to kind of get things started here and why this is even on the table is that Caine3 is that one caster that didn't really do well before because it has a really cool feat, right? It has a cool feat where you basically have synergy but for shooting in your battle group, which is really interesting. But because of, Caine with those little buddies here, like Caine3, cool. The little buddies that came with it were kind of needed to kind of get that feat synergy going, but otherwise made it so it had like no warjack points. But since the dynamic update, whoa, now you get some more going on in there. So the thing there is that you want to be spamming things. A lot of times you'll be spamming things like chargers. And then the idea is that you want to be maximizing shots, right? Something you can be shooting, pew, 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 pew. The more you can be adding that +3 to hit and the +3 damage, the better it is, right? We're just overloading as much, like really pushing that benefit and just cranking it to 11 or even further type thing. Now, why are we talking about Tesselators? Well, Tesselators kind of fit that bill for exactly what Caine is looking for. Because what are we looking for? Volume of fire. And the Tesselators, hey, here they are, this jack that is actually a point cheaper than those chargers. And then at the same time, they have their 2 shots, but they also have reload. So it can actually turn into 4 shots, basically 2 from either side. Also a very interesting thing when it comes to these Tesselators is that, well, they're Convergence. And so because they're Convergence, they make them very focus efficient. Part of the problem with this whole idea where you want to be having all these shots and all these things is that each of these shots kind of need a focus to be allocated to them, and Caine3 does not have a lot of focus. I mean, comes with 6. I guess you could be taking a Squire for another. I mean, you now have that synergistic magic stuff you could be doing, but that can't be used for allocating. It has to be like casting upkeep spells. So yeah, there's kind of like a limit to how many chargers, if we're going that way, how many chargers we can actually be allocating that limited focus to. Coming back to Tesselators, the reason why this is interesting is because they're Convergence. If one has 3 focus, it passes over to the next one, passes over to the next one, boop, 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 boop. And for 3 focus, you can basically have all your Tesselators have all the focus. Now, again, we're talking about 4 shots, only 3 focus, so they can't all be boosted, but that's something that is very interesting and very possible. But while we're talking about possible, probably one of the things that's like coming to your mind, like Malorian, there's a real problem with this jank, is that Caine3 is not Convergence. Caine3 is split between 2 different factions, Cygnar and Mercenaries, but not Convergence. So why are we even talking about this? This would be like, oh, why don't we take Caine3 and spam Juggernauts, right? Like, this is not possible. Or is it? This is one of these things I like to think that I love jank, but I never would have thought this. So one of the things that both Cygnar and Mercenaries also have access to is Nemo 4. Nemo 4 is Convergence and can take Tesselators. Now, you might be thinking, Malorian, okay, cute. There's Tesselators now in a Cygnar or mercenary faction, but that doesn't really give you anything. The feat for Caine3 has to be on the battle group. So if it's on to Nemo, that's not going to work. Well, this is where the jank really comes in. So what you would need to do is kill Nemo 4. Your own Nemo 4, you'd be trying to kill it. Then, once that's done, Caine would need to actually go and reactivate all of those Tesselators, meaning those Tesselators are now in Caine3's battle group. Now, I'm going to pause this right now and say that as soon as my locals told me about this jank, I thought it was the stupidest thing I've ever heard. One, there is no way it can be point efficient, right? Tesselators, a point cheaper than a charger, but if I'm paying 18 points for Nemo 4, like that takes up a lot of points. Clearly, I have to go and be taking a whole bunch of these, you know, it'd have to be like really paying off in a major way for it to even being viable. And then there's so many hoops you have to jump through. Like as soon as I heard this, even though there's a part of me that's like, oh, the jank, I want this to work. It's also like, this just seems so stupid that it can't be right. Now, that was what I was feeling. That's what I was thinking. And then as I posted this video, of course, that can't just be it, right? If I just came in here and said, this is the premise, I think it's stupid, goes to black, that's not going to be giving you too much. Well, I've done the math, and we're going to be talking about the actual math behind this. So if you don't like the math, don't worry. It's not going to take up a lot of this, but we're going to try and evaluate to see if this actually is, by the numbers, a good idea of something to do. Now, when we get into this, obviously, if we're going for this strategy, we need to push this as far as possible. And what it turns out is that when you do your lovely little war room here, and you're like, oh, I'm going to be adding in Nemo 4, and then Tesselator, 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 you're able to get in your Nemo 4 and 7 Tesselators. Now, obviously, you could be going with fewer, but we're going to be talking about the absolute maximum. You could be talking about other things like, oh, what if I want to be saving points for a unit? Well, actually, Nemo 4 comes with one, which would then go away as you kill them, but we'll talk about that part later. We're going to be talking about the extremes, the turning this to 11. So we're going to be comparing a Caine3 list that has Nemo 4 and as many Tesselators as possible versus a Caine3 list that has as many chargers as possible, and then do some math to see how much damage they can do. So in this one list here where you are going with the Tesselators, you're able to take, like I said, Nemo 4 and 7. That's already pretty impressive here. Now, apart from that, you still have your battle group plus 1 point that's left over, so you could be taking 2 Minutemen and 1 Charger. So that's a pretty hefty battle group. Now, as I go in here and I'm explaining this, I think one thing that I forgot to mention before we moved on to this math section is just a reminder about how you actually would reactivate these things anyway. So obviously, you would need to go and spend your first turn killing your own Nemo 4, and then the way it works for your actual Warcaster to be taking control of these other now inert jacks, right? Like these jacks, until they're really taken over again, are just like, boo, they're done. They're just sitting there. They're hit automatically in combat. They're defense 5. They don't activate. They don't engage. They're just basically like almost like terrain now, just sitting there. So the way that you actually go and reactivate them is at any time they're in its activation, your Warcaster can be in base to base with them and then go and spend a focus to go reactivate them. One of the things that I first thought made this impossible is I was pretty sure you also had to like forfeit your combat or something. And it turns out that's what happens if you're like, you know, a Jack Marshall or something like that that doesn't have focus. They don't have focus, so they have to forfeit their action. Over here, you just give a focus. And you're probably also thinking like, okay, 7 Tesselators, you can't really get this all in there all around. Well, one of the things you could do is kind of go and be like, okay, I'm going to start with like a pool of them around me, focus, 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 and then move into the next little circle that you've made before it went inert. Focus, 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 focus. And then as those jacks become now no longer inert, and now they're in Caine's battle group, they lose their combat action, but they can at least move. So they can actually go somewhere and get out of the way. So that's the way you would actually do this. Now, in competition with this, if I was to go and make a Caine3 list that was just like charger, 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 I can get 11 chargers in, and it turns out that is perfect 75 points. I can just be like, boom, that's my list. So now that we know what that list is, what you would need to do, and compare it to here, well, let's actually try and cut some numbers down and try and see which one actually might be showing some validity. So let's start over here with what we were talking about with our actual Tesselators. Now, they have 4 shots, and first thing we have to decide is that whether is it better to go for 4 shots, or is it better to go with fewer shots and boost damage? And in order to do that, we're going to have to try and pick some imaginary target. Now, that's always the problem with these comparisons. You know, it always happened back in the day with like, what's better, defenders or hunters and stuff like that. Well, for this, I'm going to start off my thought where it's like, defense something low, you know, 10, 12, whatever, and then armor 18. I always kind of feel like that's a nice standard spot to go. Now, something else I think is also kind of worthy bringing up here is that there's another interesting rule when it comes to hitting. So your chargers are just like Rat 6, but your Tesselators take on the mat and rat of whatever their battle group controller is. So when it comes to Caine3, oh, what's his rat? Oh yeah, 9. So these Tesselators will be rat 9, which is pretty significant over 6. Now, just to address that portion right away, I'm not going to give any benefit to that one way or the other. And the reason is remember, we're planning this to be part of that feat. And because of the way that unit works, it's really Caine3 pops feet, shoots something, dude with the pistols shoots something, dude with the rifle shoots something, and then basically right away there, you're already full up. And that means that all of your other battle group models are already going to be having your +3 to hit. So that really means that your Rat 6 chargers are now really Rat 9 on average dice, adding a 7. You're hitting defense 16 on average. So whether it's that or whether they're Tesselators and hitting defense 19 on average, and that's not even with boosting, basically you're gonna hit. So just so you know, when I do this math, I'm not getting any benefit one way or the other. I think it's pretty fair to say like whether you're shooting a jack that's like defense 10 to 12 or whether you're shooting a beast that's like, you know, like 13 or 14, you're probably gonna hit, and it's not really that big of a deal. Now, when it comes to that, though, one of the things that really comes up here for the Tesselators is that they're only POW 10, and POW 10s are, well, small. And so luckily, because of the feat, that's going to be going up to a 13. If I roll my average dice, that's going to be 13 plus 7, which is 20. So 2 points of damage. So right there, we have some easy math, right? What's better, buying another shot, which will give us 2 damage, or boosting, which will add a d6, on average 3.5. 3.5 is bigger than 2, so we're better off boosting. So with our 3 focus, we know what we're going to have. We'd want to boost a hit, buy another shot. And if we do that, it works out that these Tesselators are going to be doing to that armor 18 target 5.5, 5.5, another 2 for an average of 13 damage. Okay, that sounds pretty good for one Tesselator. It's going to a heavy target. What's the charger going to do? Well, the charger, higher power than the Tesselator, starts as a 12, goes to a 15, and then in this case here, you know, again, when we're just going to assume we're going to be boosting for this part here, because at this part, you can't buy more shots, so you just might as well be boosting. It actually works out that you're doing 7.5 again, no third shot, for 15 damage. So for this extra point, you're doing 2 more damage on average for your lights. You could just say right there, like, oh, I guess that's it. We did the math. We're done. Okay, we're not quite done because there's a complication when it comes to these numbers. Because these numbers were assuming you had focus for everything when that's not the case. When it comes over here to the Tesselator one, I would have my 3 focus. I need to give to Tesselator number 1, and then I can pass it on. And then I have, 3, maybe 4 if I have a actual Squire to actually give out to the rest of my battle group. And luckily in that one there, remember, it was just 2 Minutemen and then also a Charger. We could do 2 Chargers and basically a nothing, but the points don't really work out there. Whereas on the other side, where we have 11 Chargers, even when we have that Squire for full focus, only 7 of the 11 actually goes and gets that extra focus on it. So how does that number work out then when we do that math, thinking about the focus you're going to be having? Now, when we do that math, what it turns out to be is that if we look at the one side there with the Tesselators, 7 doing that 13 damage each is 91 damage. Cool. That one Charger we said is going to do 15 damage, and then those 2 Minutemen actually do more damage because they have even stronger guns, and they're doing 19 each for, a big old bunch of damage here as well. And when you add that together, it's 140 damage that everything is doing here. Now, as a small aside going on here, I want to say that we could be also talking about, well, what about Minuteman spam? Okay, Minuteman spam is a whole nother conversation. Also remember that there's a real problem of range 4 guns, and unless the enemy's really close, you can't really take advantage of that. In this big list, I think it's okay to assume that you have 2 Minutemen forward and the rest of the things back, but there are significant issues with talking about Minuteman spam. So there's that quick aside. We're moving it across, about 140 damage here done on average. Let's talk about the Chargers. Well, that math is pretty easy. We're going to be having 7 of them, which is going to be getting that full focus, and then they can be doing 105 damage, and then the other 4 that don't have that extra damage because of one's not going to be boosted, well, that one is going to be doing 3.5 less, doing 11.5 each, doing 46, doing 151 damage. So right there, when we do the math, having just Chargers doing their thing means that you're going to be doing more damage on average compared to this other one where you do all this janky crap. Now, there's some other things that we have to also throw in there as well that's not just strictly based on the numbers. The first one here being also another problem with range. So just like how we said, those Minutemen, they're only range 4. Well, when it comes to the Tesselators, they also have that problem. They're not that short of range. I'm just going to quickly just jump back over to that other one. I should have just written these things down. But anyway, the Tesselators are speed 7, which really if they're in a line, they can move 7 and still be within 6 of the next one. And then only range 9, which is not the best. And so that really means that they threat 16 inches with their guns. When you look at the Chargers, they're speed 6, but range 12 for 18 inches of threat. So the Chargers also have the additional benefit of threatening farther. Now, there's another thing in there too to think about where, if Caine wanted to, now locomotion or whatever, is it locomotion it has now? Come on, change over for me, buddy. Flicker. Now it has the flicker that affects the entire battle group, so everything goes up another 2 inches. That can kind of be applied either way. It's going to be very situational, blah, blah, blah. If I don't mention it, it'll be in the comments. So there, I mentioned it. So, okay, then the Chargers threaten further and do more damage, but there is another plus we can talk about the Nemo 4. When the Nemo 4 goes down on the table, it gives you some extra things. It gives you a unit, and you can open the gates and give yourself also a free solo. Now, when you kill Nemo, which we're going to assume because that's central to this plan, well then, the unit disappears when Nemo's not there either. So the unit, kind of a wash, pretend it's not even there, it's just going to die anyway when you take this thing off the board. The other thing, though, is you do have that free solo. So maybe that free solo is something that could be adding some extra things for you and go along. Now, here's some other negatives, though, going against this whole Tesselator plan. Number one, it really revolves around the idea that you're going to be killing Nemo 4. And Nemo 4 is a beefy boy. Nemo 4 is, defense 11, no big deal, but then armor 18, you can assume you're not going to be using the focus to reduce armor. You're not going to shoot yourself in the foot, but then you also have 26 damage boxes. And there is certainly a possibility that you go to try and kill your own Nemo and fail. And you've basically lost a turn and just really shot yourself in the foot, didn't gain anything. Your opponent probably at that point then kills off Nemo. You're now trying to scramble and next turn just reactivating and now they're all over you. That'd be horrendous. I don't know the math involved. I didn't want to get into that. Either way, it's something that you do have to keep in mind that this could happen. Nemo survives. Everything's wrecked. Something else that's a lot more likely is that what happens if your opponent goes first, which in these lists, we didn't add anything to begin +1 to go first. I mean, the one, we could go heavy metal, get a reroll, whatever. But if your opponent goes first and it goes up the field, you're going to lose a lot of time trying to be okay, they're coming, kill Nemo, activate. And you are also now in a spot where your opponent is up the field, ready to come at you, and you are sitting on 0 on your caster. And that's a real bad look. So right there, you also have a huge threat of if your opponent goes first, this could just be setting yourself up for a disaster because you have to kind of hold back so that you can actually keep things around Caine so that he can walk up and just reactivate them. And you're going to be sitting up there with 0 focus. Now, the other thing I have to also go and say is to be honest, you don't have to go all in on this. If you're up against your opponent and your opponent's really fast and they're rushing down the board and they would threaten a Caine3 that has 0 focus, you just don't kill your Nemo. You just kind of go on with the plan. Caine3 has a suboptimal feat, but at least you're not shooting yourself in the foot. You have all those Tesselators, which can do some average damage, and there's still some game to be had there. It's not an auto lose. So that option is on the table. Another thing I have to be giving this as well is that we were all focused on what happens when it's trying to shoot this armor 18, and that's what the meta was before, is all this armor 18 or higher, and the higher it goes, the more it favors things like chargers, which will at least do some damage. But we're going to a new meta that has infantry, and likely lots of infantry. And when you get to that point, it might be in your favor to have the option of being oh, there's not a big armor 18 target, but 40 armor 14 targets. All right, let's go to 4 shots each. And you can I don't care how many units you have. If you have 7 Tesselators shooting 4 shots each, yeah, get out of here. We're just going to wipe the entire board. All that infantry is going to be gone. So that is another thing to be keeping in mind. So that probably is all the factors. So let's now get to our grade about whether we think this is jank or whether we think this should be getting the Shank. Now, when it comes to Cygnar here, this seems like it's on that cusp, right? It's it's close. I was actually surprised how close those numbers actually were, but it is just worse. It's worse where the numbers are lower. That's worse where your threat is lower, and there's a lot of risk involved where what happens if this fails, or what just happens if my opponent goes first and then I'm really playing on the back foot type thing. So in that case, I think I am now justified. It came close, it's when you're watching a race and you expect it to be a huge blowout. It's oh, they were actually kind of closer than you thought. But I think this one gets the Shank. This one, get out of here. This is not good. And it felt good for me when I realized, you know what? I was right. I did my math. I did my due diligence. Ha ha ha. I win. And then I realized that Caine3 is not just a Cygnar caster. It is also a mercenary caster. And then when it comes to that, then it's oh, well, we're not comparing to chargers or maybe even Minutemen. we're comparing to, I don't know, like, like Marner spam or, Mule spam. And those are so expensive that spamming out these Tesselators easily wins. So as much as I was like feeling good, I was like, oh wait, I am still wrong, because this is actually a very viable way to run mercenary Caine3. It's like, oh, I guess this Jank actually is valid. It is not the Shank when it comes to mercenaries. This is Jank. And as much as I, for a short while, felt bad because like, oh, I was wrong. Oh man. Then I was like, well, wait a second. I actually love this, because in the old world, when we were looking at Caine3, there was no mercenary Caine3. There was a Caine3 for Cygnar, which could do like, maybe if you're going to do it, go for the charger spam. But whenever you looked at Caine3 and mercenaries, it was sad. There was just no option. Get out of here. Forget it. This is like the jankiest of jank silly plays. Does it just be like, it's not even valid. Running this in mercenaries, where you're getting this free mercenary solo from your Nemo 4, and then killing this off and trying to get those Tesselators, I think could be a valid way to play. Do note that there is no Squire when it comes to mercenaries, so you'd have to be like, okay, 3 this turn, 3 the next turn, just wait up number 7, I'll get you. But then again, like I said, this was talking about a maxed out, optimized version with as many Tesselators as possible, and maybe instead of that 7th Tesselator, you go and you take a unit or something else. So maybe that's not really all that bad either. It's sometimes good to have, like, a semi-balanced army and not just all the guns you can cram into a list. So final grading, Cygnar, I'm going to give that the Shank, but when it comes to mercenaries, this is a much, like, super appreciated Jank. So thank you to our locals who came up with this. I think it's fantastic. I believe, and I'm just going to give it credit, that goes to our local Michael Blarg, I believe is the one that came up with this idea. Maybe also Murph. And if you haven't seen, Murph is a fantastic player, putting out all these big reviews on how all the factions and the themes are looking post dynamic update. You should check them out. They're on the Line of Sight website. Go there to where they have their review and news section. They're all in there. They're fantastic. But yeah, I'm really happy that this got the thumbs up in mercenaries. And now I'm actually semi-tempted to be like, should I do this? Like, I always wanted to play Caine3, and this might now be that cool way where I could be like, Magnus 2 paired with Caine3 Tesselator spam, and I just never thought this could be like the thing that's going to be happening. So there you have it. Please let me know down below. Do you agree with my ratings? Do you think they're both should just be shanked? Do you think that this is cool, and maybe you just believe like actually even in Cygnar it's worth doing? Please, I'd love to be having these ideas down below. Otherwise, I want to be giving out a huge thank you to all my patrons. You're the ones that were really pushing and making these things happen, and I love interacting with you. And otherwise, we'll catch you later. Bye.